Sarah sat quietly in the airport control tower, just another ordinary worker watching planes on her computer screen. Nobody knew she used to guide fighter jets through war zones. When 14 planes faced deadly emergencies in 3 minutes, her hidden military skills would either save everyone or fail completely. Before watching full story, comment below from where are you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. Sarah Chin sat quietly at her computer screen in the airport control tower on a Tuesday afternoon in March. She watched the small green dots that showed airplanes flying in the sky around the airport. Her job was to tell pilots where to go and keep them safe from crashing into each other. She had been working at this airport for 2 years, and everyone thought she was just a normal, good worker who did her job without any problems. The control tower was a tall building that looked out over the airport runways. Inside, there were many computer screens showing radar images of all the planes in the sky. Radio equipment let the controllers talk to pilots flying overhead. Sarah worked at one of these stations, watching over a section of airspace that was usually quiet with just a few small planes. The other controllers in the tower were older and had more experience than Sarah. They handled the busy parts of the sky where many commercial jets flew close together. These senior controllers like Jenkins and Williams managed the difficult work of guiding big passenger planes through crowded airspace and bad weather. Sarah only watched a quiet corner where just a few small private planes and helicopters flew around. Her boss Martinez was the supervisor who watched over all the controllers. He thought Sarah did okay work, but nothing special or outstanding. She followed the rules, talked clearly on the radio, and never made mistakes. But he never asked her to handle the really challenging situations that required years of experience and special training. To him, Sarah was just another competent employee doing her assigned job adequately. The other workers like Jenkins and Williams were friendly to Sarah, but they treated her like any other person doing their job. They would say hello in the morning and chat during breaks, but they never asked for her advice on difficult air traffic situations. When complex weather problems came up, they handled it themselves or asked Martinez for help. Nobody thought Sarah had any special skills or emergency experience beyond her basic training. During her quiet shifts, Sarah would monitor her assigned sector and give routine instructions to pilots. She would tell them what altitude to fly at, which direction to turn, and when to contact the next controller. Her voice on the radio was calm and professional, just like all the other controllers. She processed standard clearances and handled normal communications without any problems, but nothing about her seemed exceptional or remarkable. What nobody in the tower knew was that Sarah used to work for the military before this civilian job. She had never talked about her past experience because she wanted to fit in and do quiet, normal work. But before she came to this airport, Sarah had been an air traffic controller for fighter jets during wartime operations overseas. For 5 years, Sarah had worked at military air bases where she guided combat aircraft through dangerous missions. She had coordinated fighter jets, attack helicopters, and transport planes during active battles where enemy soldiers were shooting missiles and anti-aircraft guns at American pilots. Her job had been to direct multiple aircraft simultaneously through combat zones, help damaged planes find safe places to land, and coordinate rescue operations when pilots were shot down behind enemy lines. During her military service, Sarah had managed emergency situations that civilian controllers never face. She had guided squadrons of fighter jets through enemy territory while tracking surface-to-air missiles on radar. She had coordinated complex air strikes involving dozens of aircraft attacking multiple targets at the same time. When pilots radioed that they were hit by enemy fire and losing fuel or having engine problems, Sarah had calculated emergency landing options and guided them to safety under extreme pressure. The military had trained Sarah to process multiple crisis situations simultaneously while staying completely calm. She learned to manage her emotions and think clearly even when pilots were screaming over the radio that they were going to crash. She practiced emergency procedures until she could handle any combination of aircraft problems, weather emergencies, and equipment failures that might happen during combat operations. But Sarah had left that stressful life behind when she finished her military service. She wanted a peaceful job where she could use her air traffic skills without the constant danger and pressure of combat. She came to this civilian airport hoping for quiet, routine work where the most exciting thing would be guiding a small plane around a thunderstorm. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, the weather had been normal when Sarah started her shift at 2 p.m. Spring weather was usually mild, with just a few scattered clouds and light winds. Sarah monitored her sector, which included several small aircraft, a corporate business jet carrying executives to a meeting, 2 training flights with student pilots learning to fly, a medical helicopter transporting a patient to a hospital, and a few other private planes. The other controllers handled the busy commercial traffic. Jenkins managed the arrival corridor where big passenger jets approached the airport for landing. Williams coordinated departures, telling pilots when to taxi to the runway and take off. Martinez supervised the whole operation from his elevated position, making sure everything ran smoothly and safely. Around 3:15 p.m., Sarah noticed something changing on the weather radar display. A storm system that meteorologists had predicted would arrive in the evening was moving much faster than expected. The radar showed a line of severe thunderstorms approaching from the west, with heavy rain, strong winds and dangerous lightning. At the same time, Sarah started seeing error messages on her computer screen. The main radar system that tracked aircraft positions was having technical problems. Warning lights blinked on several control panels, indicating that backup systems were not working properly. The maintenance technicians had been working on equipment upgrades all week, and it seemed like something had gone wrong with the installation. Jenkins noticed the weather problem first and called out to Martinez. "Boss, that storm line is moving faster than forecast. We might need to change the approach procedures sooner than planned." Martinez looked at the weather display and frowned. "How much time do we have?" "Maybe 20 minutes before it hits the airport," Jenkins replied, starting to coordinate with approaching aircraft to change their flight paths. But 20 minutes turned out to be too optimistic. The storm system accelerated as it approached, driven by high-altitude winds that the Weather Service had not predicted accurately. At exactly 3:47 p.m., the leading edge of the storm reached the airport area like a moving wall of darkness. At that same moment, the main computer system that controlled air traffic displays suffered a complete failure. All the radar screens went black for 30 seconds, leaving the controllers flying blind. When the displays came back online, they showed confusing and contradictory information. Some aircraft appeared in two places at once. Others disappeared completely from the screen. In those crucial 30 seconds of system failure, 14 different airplanes all encountered serious emergencies simultaneously. The combination of severe weather, equipment malfunctions, and communication problems created a perfect storm of aviation crises that overwhelmed the tower's normal procedures. The storm brought winds gusting over 60 miles per hour, sheets of rain that made it impossible for pilots to see the runway, and lightning that lit up the sky every few seconds. Planes that had been approaching for normal landings suddenly found themselves flying into dangerous weather conditions that threatened to tear their aircraft apart. United Flight 447, a passenger jet carrying 180 people, was on final approach when the storm hit. The pilots radioed that they were caught in severe turbulence and running low on fuel. They had been diverted from their original destination due to weather there, and now they only had enough fuel for one landing attempt. Delta Flight 229 was taking off when an engine fire warning light illuminated in the cockpit. The pilots declared an emergency and needed to return to the airport immediately, but the storm was making it impossible to see the runway for a safe landing. A medical helicopter designated N-47 was transporting a critically injured patient to the hospital when it flew directly into the worst part of the storm. The pilot radioed that he had lost all visibility and was being tossed around by severe turbulence. The patient's life depended on reaching the hospital quickly, but the helicopter was in danger of crashing. American Flight 615, another passenger plane, was holding in a pattern waiting for the storm to pass when its navigation system failed. The pilots lost their position reference and were flying blind in the storm clouds, not knowing where they were in relation to mountains or other aircraft. A small training plane with a student pilot was caught in the storm and panicking. The instructor pilot had become incapacitated due to air sickness from the severe turbulence, leaving the inexperienced student to control the aircraft alone in dangerous conditions. Cargo Flight 892 was carrying hazardous chemicals when it suffered a real engine failure, not just a warning light, but an actual fire in the left engine. The pilots needed to land immediately, but if the plane crashed near populated areas, the toxic cargo could create a disaster affecting thousands of people on the ground. Two corporate jets, flying at the same altitude in opposite directions, were on a collision course in the heavy rain and clouds where neither pilot could see the other aircraft. Without immediate intervention, they would crash head-on in less than 4 minutes. A military transport plane conducting a training exercise had its hydraulic system fail, making it nearly impossible to control the aircraft. The military pilots were struggling to keep the heavy plane in the air while flying through the dangerous storm. 3 other aircraft, 2 private planes and another commercial flight, all reported various combinations of mechanical failures, navigation system problems and dangerous weather encounters. Each plane needed immediate help, but there were so many emergencies happening at once that the normal air traffic control procedures could not handle them all. The experienced controllers in the tower became overwhelmed by the complexity of managing so many simultaneous crises. Jenkins stared at his radar screen, trying to figure out which aircraft to help first. His normal procedures were designed to handle 1 or maybe 2 emergencies at a time, not 14 at once. William started trying to talk to 3 different pilots simultaneously, but their radio calls became mixed up and confusing. She accidentally gave one pilot's instructions to another aircraft, creating even more confusion and potential danger. Martinez stood behind the other controllers trying to coordinate the response, but there were simply too many problems happening too fast for normal procedures to work. The tower had emergency plans for various situations, but nothing in their training had prepared them for 14 aircraft in distress at the same time. As the senior controllers struggled with the overwhelming situation, pilots' voices over the radio became increasingly desperate. Fuel levels were dropping. Weather conditions were getting worse. Mechanical problems were becoming more serious. Without immediate and coordinated help, multiple aircraft would crash within minutes. That's when Sarah Chen stood up from her quiet corner workstation and walked to the center of the control room. Her voice, which everyone had always heard as calm and ordinary, suddenly carried a tone of authority and command that nobody had ever heard from her before. "I've got this," she said to Martinez in a voice that was firm, confident, and completely in control. Without waiting for permission or discussion, Sarah sat down at the master control station that could access all radio frequencies and radar displays simultaneously. She switched her headset to the emergency frequency that could reach all 14 aircraft at once. She took a deep breath, looked at the complex display of aircraft positions and problems and began to speak. Her voice over the radio was completely different from the quiet, ordinary controller everyone knew. Instead of the routine, professional tone she used for normal traffic, Sarah now sounded like a military commander who had faced life-and-death situations many times before. "All aircraft declaring emergency, this is Tower Emergency Control. I am assuming command of all traffic in this sector. You will follow my instructions exactly and immediately. Lives depend on perfect compliance." The other controllers stopped what they were doing and watched in amazement as Sarah took control of the entire crisis. Her hands moved across multiple radio controls and computer displays with practiced precision. Her eyes rapidly scanned the radar screen, instantly processing the position, altitude, speed, heading, and emergency status of all 14 aircraft. What happened next seemed almost impossible to the watching controllers. Sarah began coordinating all 14 aircraft simultaneously, giving rapid-fire instructions that prioritized each pilot's survival based on fuel levels, weather conditions, mechanical problems, and collision avoidance. Her radio calls came one after another in perfect sequence, each one precisely timed and exactly right for each aircraft's specific emergency. United 447, you are priority 1 for landing due to fuel state. Turn right to heading 270, descend and maintain 3,000 feet. I am clearing runway 09 for your immediate approach. Wind is 090 at 25 gusting to 45. You are cleared for emergency ILS approach. Delta 229, your engine fire indication is likely false due to system malfunction, but treat as real emergency. Climb immediately to 6,000 feet, turn left heading 180. Shut down left engine and configure for single engine approach. You are number 2 for landing after United. Medical helicopter N-47, you are flying directly into the storm core. Descend immediately to 1,500 feet and turn right to heading 090. Follow the Interstate 85 highway eastbound. I am coordinating with Metro Hospital for emergency landing at their alternate helipad. Sarah's instructions continued in rapid succession, each transmission perfectly calculated to solve immediate problems while setting up longer-term solutions. She was not just managing air traffic, she was conducting a complex military-style operation where every decision affected multiple aircraft and every second counted. For the cargo plane carrying dangerous chemicals, Sarah coordinated with military air traffic control to clear emergency landing space at a nearby Air Force base, far from populated areas. She guided the pilots through engine fire procedures while simultaneously calculating wind drift patterns to ensure that if the plane did crash, the toxic materials would not affect civilian populations. The 2 corporate jets on collision course were separated by precise heading changes that brought them safely past each other with miles of clearance. Sarah saw the potential collision 3 minutes before it would have happened and issued instructions that prevented disaster while coordinating with the pilot's emergency procedures. For the student pilot who was panicking in the storm, Sarah's voice became gentle but absolutely firm. She talked him through each control input, telling him exactly how to level the wings, control the altitude, and navigate to calmer air. Her instructions were so clear and confidence-inspiring that the young pilot was able to regain control and fly safely. The military transport with hydraulic failure was directed to a specific altitude and heading that would allow the crew to practice emergency landing procedures while staying clear of civilian traffic. Sarah coordinated with military controllers to prepare emergency services at their destination airfield. Throughout this 3-minute crisis, Sarah maintained perfect situational awareness of all 14 aircraft simultaneously. She knew exactly where each plane was located, what problem it was facing, how much fuel it had remaining, what weather conditions were affecting it, and how its emergency related to all the other aircraft in the airspace. Her hands moved across multiple radio controls, switching between different frequencies to coordinate with other control towers, military bases, and emergency services. She used a second radio to communicate with approach controllers at nearby airports while using her primary radio to direct the emergency aircraft. Her coordination was flawless and instantaneous. The other controllers watched in stunned amazement as Sarah demonstrated capabilities they had never seen before. She was processing information faster than they thought humanly possible. She was making decisions that required years of experience and training that none of them knew she possessed. She was coordinating multiple aircraft through complex emergency procedures while maintaining perfect awareness of weather conditions, fuel states, mechanical problems, and collision avoidance. As the 3 minutes of intense crisis management ended, all 14 aircraft were safe. United 447 landed with only 8 minutes of fuel remaining, cutting it extremely close, but safe. The cargo plane made an emergency landing at the military base with the engine fire contained and no toxic material released. The medical helicopter reached the hospital's alternate landing site, saving the patient's life. The student pilot was guided to an area of calm weather where he could safely land with his instructor's help. Every single aircraft that had been in mortal danger was now out of immediate crisis. Some were safely on the ground. Others were in stable flight conditions where they could proceed to safe landings. Not one pilot had been injured. Not one aircraft had been lost. What should have been a massive disaster with multiple fatalities had been resolved without a single casualty. The storm continued to rage outside the tower windows, but all the aircraft were now either safely landed or flying in areas where the weather was manageable. Sarah had not only solved each individual emergency but had also coordinated the entire response so that the aircraft did not interfere with each other's emergency procedures. When the immediate crisis was over, the control tower fell completely silent except for the sound of heavy rain beating against the windows. The other controllers looked at Sarah with expressions of amazement, respect, and disbelief. They had just witnessed something that seemed impossible according to everything they knew about air traffic control procedures and human limitations. Martinez stepped forward, his face showing complete shock at what he had just observed. This woman he had considered just another adequate employee had just performed what appeared to be a miracle of crisis management. He struggled to find words to express his amazement. "Sarah," he said quietly, his voice filled with awe, "where did you learn to do that? What you just did should have been impossible. No controller should be able to manage that many emergencies simultaneously." Sarah slowly removed her headset and sat back in the chair, her hands still slightly shaking from the adrenaline of the crisis. For the first time since anyone had known her, she looked tired and emotionally drained. The calm, unremarkable facade she had maintained for 2 years was gone, replaced by the expression of someone who had just carried an enormous burden of responsibility. "I used to be a military air traffic controller," she said simply, her voice returning to its normal quiet tone. "I spent 5 years guiding fighter jets through combat missions in Afghanistan and Iraq. When you've coordinated air strikes while surface-to-air missiles are being fired at your pilots, civilian emergencies become much more manageable." The revelation hit the other controllers like a physical shock. This quiet woman who had sat in the corner handling routine traffic for 2 years had actually been managing combat air operations under enemy fire. Everything about Sarah's background suddenly made sense: her unshakable calm under pressure, her instant decision-making ability, her flawless radio communications, and her capacity to process multiple crisis situations simultaneously. Sarah began to explain her military experience to her amazed colleagues. She told them about directing fighter squadrons through dangerous missions over enemy territory, coordinating close air support for ground troops under attack, and managing complex combat operations where dozens of aircraft attacked multiple targets simultaneously while avoiding enemy air defenses. "I managed 47 combat missions," she continued, her voice steady but her eyes showing the weight of those memories. I coordinated emergency extractions when helicopters were shot down. I guided damaged aircraft to safe bases when they were losing fuel or had engine failures from enemy fire. I directed search and rescue operations behind enemy lines when pilots were forced to eject from their aircraft. She explained how military air traffic controllers are trained to handle multiple crisis situations that would overwhelm civilian controllers. Combat operations require managing many aircraft in rapidly changing, dangerous conditions where split-second decisions determine whether pilots live or die. Military controllers learn to process complex information instantly, make life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure, and coordinate multiple aircraft through simultaneous emergencies. The military teaches you to stay completely calm no matter how bad things get, Sarah said. When pilots are screaming over the radio that they're being shot at or their plane is on fire, you have to keep your voice steady and give them exactly the right instructions to survive. You learn to think clearly when everything is chaos. Jenkins, who had been struggling to coordinate just 3 of the emergency aircraft, looked at his radar screen and then back at Sarah with newfound respect and humility. "I've been doing this job for 12 years, he said slowly, "and I've never seen anything like what you just accomplished. I couldn't even keep track of 3 emergencies, and you handled 14 simultaneously." Williams, who had become confused trying to help multiple aircraft at once, shook her head in amazement. "How do you process that much information at the same time? It seemed like you knew exactly where every plane was and what each pilot needed, all at the same instant." Sarah smiled for the first time since the crisis had begun. Military training teaches you to compartmentalize information and prioritize based on survival factors. I was constantly calculating fuel states, weather conditions, mechanical problems, and collision risks for all 14 aircraft. Your mind learns to work like a computer when people's lives depend on it. The phone in the control tower began ringing with calls from other airports, military bases, and aviation authorities, all asking about the controller who had managed such an unprecedented emergency situation. Pilots who had been involved in the crisis were calling to thank the tower commander, who had saved their lives. News of the extraordinary crisis management was spreading rapidly through the aviation community. The Federal Aviation Administration wanted to know how one controller had successfully coordinated 14 simultaneous emergencies when standard procedures indicated that such a situation should have resulted in multiple disasters. Air traffic control training schools would eventually study recordings of Sarah's radio communications as examples of perfect emergency management under impossible circumstances. Over the following hours, as the storm finally passed and normal operations resumed at the airport, word spread throughout the aviation industry about what had happened. Sarah's 3-minute performance became legendary among controllers and pilots. The incident would be studied and discussed for years as an example of how military training and experience could provide capabilities far beyond standard civilian air traffic control procedures. But Sarah herself just wanted to return to her quiet corner of the tower, monitoring routine flights and processing standard clearances. She had demonstrated that her military background had given her skills that exceeded normal civilian training by an enormous margin. She had proven that sometimes the most ordinary-looking people carry extraordinary abilities that only become visible when lives depend on their expertise. From that day forward, Sarah was no longer just another controller in the tower. She became the person everyone turned to when complex emergency situations arose. Martinez promoted her to senior controller and made her the tower's primary emergency coordinator. Other controllers sought her advice on difficult situations and her training on advanced crisis management techniques. But even with her new recognition and responsibilities, Sarah preferred the calm, routine days when her most challenging task was guiding a small private plane around a minor weather disturbance. She had proven herself capable of handling the impossible, but she was happiest when her remarkable skills were not needed. The aviation community learned several important lessons from that March afternoon. They realized that military experience provides air traffic controllers with capabilities that cannot be replicated through civilian training alone. They understood that combat operations create skills in crisis management, multiple task coordination, and decision-making under extreme pressure that are invaluable during civilian emergencies. Most importantly, they learned never to underestimate the quiet professional sitting in the corner. Sometimes the most remarkable abilities are hidden in the most unremarkable people, waiting silently for the moment when everything depends on their expertise. Sarah Chin had proven that heroes don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they just sit quietly at their workstations, ready to save 14 lives in 3 minutes when the impossible becomes necessary.